"Go ahead, old man. Start her up." Captain Marcus Cole said it with a grin wide enough for the whole crowd to see, one hand resting on the cool grey skin of the Tomcat, the other sweeping toward the open cockpit like a game show host giving away a prize nobody could win. It got the laugh he wanted. He didn't know that the man climbing the ladder had flown that exact airplane home across a black ocean with a dead friend strapped into the seat behind him. He didn't know that the hands reaching for the canopy rail had touched those switches 10,000 times before half the people in that crowd were born. By the time those two engines clawed their way out of silence and shook the heat off the tarmac, nobody was laughing anymore. If you believe a man's worth was never meant to be measured by the wear on a faded flight jacket, do me a favour before we go any further. Type "still sharp" in the comments, and stay with me to the end, because what happened on that flight line is the kind of thing people drive home in silence after. His name was Earl Sutton, though almost nobody at the Coastal Heritage Airshow knew it, and that was exactly the way he wanted it. He was 72 years old, narrow through the shoulders now, in a way he hadn't been once, and he moved with the careful economy of a man whose knees had logged as many hard landings as his logbook had. He wore a windbreaker, the colour of weak coffee, and a ball cap, with no unit on it, no wings, no nothing. He had driven 3 hours alone that morning, paid for his ticket like everyone else, and spent the first part of the day standing quietly at the rope line, with his hands folded in front of him, watching the static display jets the way other men his age watch old photographs. He did not ask for attention. In 50 years, he had never once had to. The jet he kept drifting back to was an F-14 Tomcat, parked at the head of the Warbird Row, with its wings swept forward and its tailcode freshly painted AC, and beneath the canopy rail the Modex 201, and along the twin tails the crossed swords of a squadron that hadn't existed in active service for a long time. The collection that owned her had spent the better part of a decade and a fortune. Most men couldn't imagine getting a single Tomcat back into the air, the only one of her kind, cleared to fly anywhere on this side of the world. To the families filing past with their phones up, she was a beautiful grey dinosaur. To Earl Sutton, she was something else entirely. He stood at the rope and read her bureau number off the nose and went very still, and a much younger man might have noticed the way his jaw worked, but the captain, running the cockpit photo line that afternoon, was not in the business of noticing old men. Captain Marcus Cole was the headline act, and he knew it. 42, square-jawed, a current naval aviator brought in to fly the collection's showpieces and charm the crowd between demonstrations, and he was good at both. He had a flight suit, zipped to mid-chest, and aviator glasses pushed up into his hair, and a line of patter he could run in his sleep. The cockpit photo-op was the day's hot ticket. $20 to a veterans fund, climb the ladder, sit where the legend sat, smile for the camera. Cole had been at it 2 hours, and the charm was wearing thin around the edges. So when a stooped old man in a coffee-coloured windbreaker shuffled up to the ladder and asked in a voice barely above the engine drone from the runway whether he might sit in the front, Cole saw an easy laugh and took it. "Sure thing, Pop," he said, loud enough to carry. "Just don't touch anything you can't put back." A few people chuckled. Cole warmed to it. He helped the old man up the ladder with exaggerated care, narrating for the crowd, "Easy now, watch the step. We've got a national treasure here, folks." And the old man said nothing, just settled himself down into the seat the way a hand fits a glove worn soft over years. And that was when Cole, riding the crowd, leaned over the rail and delivered the line he'd use a dozen more times that day. "Go ahead, old man, start her up, grinning, playing to the cameras." Certain, the way only the young and the lucky are ever certain, that nothing at all was about to happen. What he did not see was the change that came over Earl Sutton the moment he was alone in that seat. The shuffle was gone. The careful, apologetic stoop was gone. His back found an angle it remembered, and his eyes travelled the panel left to right and back the way a man reads a face he has loved his whole life. His right hand came up, and his fingers walked the switches without hesitating, without searching. Not the searching of a tourist, but the flat certainty of muscle that had done this in the dark, in heavy seas with alarms, screaming, and a deck pitching under him. Generators. Fuel. The crowd was still laughing at Cole's joke. The old man's thumb found a guarded switch and lifted the guard, and a young woman near the front who happened to work the collection's ground crew stopped laughing and grabbed her supervisor's sleeve because she knew that sequence, and she knew that a tourist could not possibly know it. Then the right engine lit. There is no mistaking the sound of a TF-30 spooling up, a low moan that climbs into a hard, ragged scream, the air itself going taut, a wash of jet heat rolling out across the asphalt and flattening the grass at the rope line. Phones came down. Children pressed their hands over their ears. Captain Cole's grin froze, then collapsed entirely as he scrambled back from the ladder, shouting something that no one could hear over the rising howl of the second engine catching and joining the first. The whole flight line, the announcer, the vendors, the families, the line of jets, and the men who tended them, went silent under that roar, every head turning toward a parked Tomcat that was suddenly impossibly alive, with a stooped old man in a coffee-coloured windbreaker sitting calm as Sunday in the front seat, his hands resting on the throttles like they had never once left. The collection's ground crew was running now, and the engines were already settling back to a smooth idle under the old man's touch. He hadn't spun them up to bolt anywhere. He'd simply brought her to life and let her breathe the way you'd start an old friend's heart just to feel it beat. And out of the crowd, moving faster than a man his age had any business moving, came someone nobody had paid attention to all day. An elderly man in a navy blazer with a small gold pin on the lapel, who had bought his own ticket too, and who had been standing 50 feet back watching the whole thing with his hand pressed over his mouth. He went straight past the security, people waving everyone back. He went straight to the foot of the ladder and looked up at the cockpit, and when Earl Sutton looked down and saw him, both old men's faces broke at exactly the same moment. "Stand down," the man in the blazer said to the ground crew, and there was an iron in his voice that made grown men stop where they stood. "Stand down. That is a United States naval aviator, and that is his airplane." He turned to the captain, who was white to the lips. "Son, do you have any idea who you just told to start her up?" Captain Cole did not. So the Admiral told him, and he told the whole silenced flight line at the same time, because some things are owed an audience. His name was Jack Maddox, and 40 years ago he had been a commander, the skipper of a Tomcat squadron flying off a carrier in the Mediterranean during the worst weeks of a confrontation. Most of these people only knew from grainy newsreels. The man in that cockpit, he said, had been one of his pilots, one of the best he ever had, and that airplane, that exact airframe, Euro number and all, was the jet they all still talked about at reunions in low voices. "We call her the one that came home," Maddox said, "and the man flying her that night is sitting right there." Then the Admiral's voice dropped and the crowd leaned in to catch it. And this is the part the title never told you, the part Earl Sutton himself would have carried to his grave without a single word, because that was the kind of man he was. On a black night in 1986, low on fuel and a long way from the boat, that Tomcat had taken a catastrophic engine failure, a compressor stall that became a fire, the cockpit filling with warnings, the airframe trying to tear itself apart. By every rule and every instinct, the crew should have pointed her at open water and pulled the handle. 2 good ejections. 2 men in the water for the hello to fish out. But the young radar intercept officer in the back seat, Lieutenant Danny Cole, had been hurt in the violence of the emergency, hurt badly, slumped and unresponsive over his scope. And Earl Sutton would not leave him. To eject would have meant punching out alone and abandoning a man who could not save himself. So instead, Sutton did the thing they teach you cannot be done. He nursed a crippled, burning Tomcat through the dark on one engine, talked himself down by the numbers, and brought her aboard the carrier in a single arrested pass with the deck heaving and the fuel gauges reading 0, all so that the man behind him would not die alone in the sea. Danny Cole did not survive the night, but Earl Sutton brought him home. Because of what he did, there was a man to bring back to a young wife. There was a flag to fold. There was a grave and a name on a stone, and a place a family could go to remember. Maddox said all of this with his voice cracking, and then he looked at Captain Marcus Cole, who had gone perfectly, terribly still, and he said the last of it gently, the way you set down something fragile. "You were 18 months old, son. You don't remember your father. But the reason you grew up with his picture on the wall instead of an empty ocean, the reason there was anything left to bury, is the man you just called old man and told to start her up. If this story is sitting in your chest right now the way it sat in that crowd, type Honor in the comments, because some debts can only be paid by remembering." For a moment the captain couldn't move at all. 42 years of a father he'd never known, a folded flag in a triangle of glass on his mother's mantle, a story told so many times it had worn smooth and stopped feeling real, and all of it had just walked up a ladder in a coffee-coloured windbreaker and sat down in the seat where it happened. Then Marcus Cole did the only thing a decent man can do when the ground opens under him. He didn't make excuses. He didn't reach for his rank or his charm. He walked to the foot of the ladder, came to attention in front of that idling jet, and brought his hand up in the slowest, straightest salute of his life, to the old man he had mocked, the man who had carried his father home. And Earl Sutton, looking down through the canopy with tears cutting clean lines through 40 years of silence, took one hand off the throttles and returned it. By the end of that day, the captain had done something else. He had stood with the collection's owners and the admiral, and he had insisted, not asked, insisted that before the show closed that Tomcat fly one more time, and that the man in the front seat be the one to take her up. There were forms and waivers and a frantic hour of phone calls, and Captain Marcus Cole climbed into the back seat himself, into the seat his father had died in, and trusted his life to the hands that had once refused to let go of it. They taxied past a crowd that had gathered 10 deep along the fence, and when those engines went to full power and the Tomcat rotated off the runway and pulled up into the gold of the late sun, 10,000 people who had laughed 2 hours earlier were on their feet with their hands over their hearts. Earl Sutton flew her gentle and he flew her clean, one slow circuit over the field, the way you'd carry something precious you'd been given back after a long time gone. And when he brought her down and rolled to a stop and the canopy came up, the first thing the crowd saw was the old man reaching back over his shoulder and the young captain in the rear seat gripping that weathered hand and not letting go. He went back to being nobody after that. He drove home alone the next morning, the same 3 hours, back to the same quiet life, and if you passed him at a gas station, you would never have looked twice. That's the thing about men like Earl Sutton. The ones who carry the most are almost always the ones who say the least, standing at the back of the crowd in a jacket with no patches, asking quietly if they might sit in the front just one more time. We don't get to choose how the world reads us at first glance, but we do get to choose whether we look closer before we open our mouths, whether we see the old man or the man. So, here's where I'll leave you. Somewhere near you right now, there is someone ordinary looking who once did the extraordinary and never told a soul. If this channel is where you come to make sure men like Earl Sutton are never forgotten, if you believe the ones who brought our people home deserve to be remembered out loud, then subscribe and stand with us, because as long as we keep telling these stories, that engine never really stops running.